The boy had not eaten a real meal in almost 3 days, and still the first thing he did when he saw the woman crying alone on the third bench inside Cooper Park was reach into the paper bag pressed against his ribs and take out the only piece of food he owned. No one around them slowed down. No one looked. In a city like Pittsburgh, in a park like Cooper, on a damp October afternoon when the wind smelled like rain that had not yet decided to fall, a thin black boy approaching a well-dressed white woman on a bench was the kind of moment people stepped wider around on purpose, the way you step around a puddle you cannot tell the depth of. But that boy, Micah Ellison, 11 years old and so light in his clothes that the wind kept catching the back of his coat like a sail, did not know that the woman crying into her gloved hands was worth more money than every brick, every fountain, every iron lamppost in the entire park combined. He only knew that she was crying. He only knew that crying in public was the kind of thing a person did when they had run out of private places to put their pain. He only knew that his mother, before the accident, before the long, quiet year that followed, had told him that the world only stayed kind if somebody, somewhere, decided to keep being kind first. That single decision, made under the gray sky of a Tuesday in October on a park bench in the middle of a city that did not know either of their names, would set in motion a story that would travel far beyond Pittsburgh, and far beyond what either of them could have imagined when the first half of a tuna sandwich changed hands. Before we get into it, leave a comment telling me where you are watching from, and if stories about quiet kindness move you, hit the subscribe button so you do not miss the ones that come after this. Now, let me take you back to that bench. Pittsburgh in late October had a way of looking older than it was. The kind of gray that climbed the brick walls of the old buildings, and settled into the rust on the railings of the bridges, and worked its way into the coats of the people waiting at crosswalks with their shoulders pulled up toward their ears. The wind came down off the rivers, the Allegheny and the Monongahela folding their cold breath into one long, damp current that pushed through the streets and made the leaves on the sidewalks scrape together in a sound that was almost like whispering. The trees in Cooper Park had already given up most of their color. What was left clung in stubborn bronze patches to the upper branches, and the rest carpeted the paths in a slick mat that the groundskeepers had not yet gotten around to raking. The smell of wet bark, of cold iron, of the soft river that ran behind the park's eastern wall, was the smell of a city preparing to settle into its long gray season. On a path that curved through the middle of the park, between a low stone fountain that had been turned off for the winter, and a row of empty benches painted the dark green that all city benches everywhere seemed to be painted, Micah Ellison walked slowly with his hands in his pockets and his eyes on the ground. His coat was a hand-me-down from a boy 2 years older who had outgrown it, and the sleeves came down past his fingertips, which was a thing he did not mind because at least his hands stayed warm. His sneakers had been white once. They were not white anymore. The laces on the left shoe were knotted in 3 places where they had broken and been tied back together, and the rubber sole was lifting just slightly at the toe, the way an old book begins to come apart at the spine. He walked carefully because he had learned that the way you walked told people a great deal about you, and he had been working very hard for almost a year now on walking like a boy who still had somewhere to go. In his right hand, tucked carefully inside a brown paper bag that had once held a loaf of bread, was a tuna fish sandwich. It was the only food he had. A woman named Miss Della, who ran the small community kitchen on the corner of Leamington and Frankstown, had pressed it into his hand that morning the way she always did, with a small extra squeeze of his knuckles and a quiet, "You eat all of this, Micah. Not part of it, all of it." Miss Della had been feeding him on and off for months now, ever since his aunt had stopped being able to manage the rent on the small apartment they shared, and ever since the long, slow string of nights had begun where Micah sometimes slept in the back room behind Miss Della's kitchen, and sometimes slept on the bus, and once, on a warm September night that he tried not to think about, slept on a bench almost exactly like the ones in Cooper Park. He had not eaten the sandwich yet. He had been saving it. He had a system about food that he had worked out for himself over the past year, a quiet, careful system that no adult had ever explained to him, but that he had figured out the way small animals figure out where the dry spots are when the rain comes. The system was this. You did not eat food the moment you got it. You waited. You waited until your stomach had passed the first sharp ache and settled into the dull, low hum that meant your body had given up asking. Then you ate because eating then made the food last longer in your head, and the head, Micah had learned, was where most of the hunger really lived. So he was walking through Cooper Park with a tuna sandwich in a paper bag and a dull, low hum in his stomach, and he was almost ready to sit down on one of the empty benches and eat it when he heard the sound. The sound was not loud. That was the first thing he noticed about it. Loud crying belonged to children who had scraped their knees and to grown people on television. This was the other kind, the quiet kind that came out in small, uneven breaths, the kind that a person made when they had been crying for long enough that the body had run out of the bigger sounds and only the smaller ones were left. It was the kind of crying that a person does when they have decided they are alone, even though they are not really alone, even though they are on a bench in the middle of a public park in the middle of a city of 300,000 people. Micah knew that kind of crying. He had made that kind of crying himself, in the bathroom at the back of Miss Della's kitchen on a Tuesday last March, with the door locked and the cold water running so no one would hear. On the day he had finally understood that his mother was not coming back to get him because his mother had not made it through the accident that the doctors had spent 4 months pretending she might. He stopped on the path. He turned his head slowly the way you turn your head when you are not sure if you really heard what you thought you heard. The sound came again, slightly louder this time, from the third bench down on his left. It was tucked partly behind a tall hedge that had been planted long ago to break the wind off the river, and the hedge cast a kind of green-gray shadow over the bench, so that at first all Micah could see was the shape of a person sitting very still with their head bent forward. He took a few steps closer, careful, the way he was always careful with grown people. He had learned to read adults the way some boys learn to read baseball cards, by the small things, by the angle of the shoulders, by the placement of the hands, by whether the eyes when they finally looked up were the kind of eyes that meant safety or the kind of eyes that meant move along. The shape on the bench was a woman. She was wearing a long camel-colored coat that looked soft and expensive even from where he was standing, the kind of coat that did not come from any store he had ever been inside. Her hair was a pale silvery blonde, pulled back into a low twist at the back of her neck. She had on dark leather gloves and a pair of leather boots that had once been polished and were now spotted with the gray Pittsburgh mud that the morning's drizzle had left on the paths. There was a leather handbag on the bench beside her, but it was unzipped and tipped slightly on its side, the way a bag gets when a person has set it down without paying attention to it. A folded white handkerchief was crumpled in her left hand. Her right hand was pressed flat across her mouth, as if she were trying to hold something in that she could no longer hold in. Micah stood on the path about 15 feet away from her, and he watched her for a long, quiet moment, the way he had learned to watch things before he decided what to do about them. He did not know who she was. He could not have known. He could see that she was old, somewhere in her 60s maybe, with a face that even crying was a kind of face that looked like it had been used to giving orders for a long time. He could see that she was not from his part of the city. He could see that the coat and the boots and the bag all belonged to a life he had only ever read about in the books at the public library on Negley Avenue. But he could also see, very plainly, the only thing that mattered right then, which was that her shoulders were shaking under that beautiful coat in the small, terrible way that shoulders shake when a person is trying not to fall apart in a place where falling apart is not allowed. He thought about walking past. That was the honest first thought he had, and he was honest enough with himself, even at 11, to know that the thought had been there. He thought about the dull, low hum in his stomach and the tuna sandwich in his hand and the careful system he had worked out about food, and he thought that whatever this woman was crying about, she was crying in a coat that probably cost more than every coat his whole family had ever owned put together, and she was almost certainly not crying because she was hungry. He thought about the fact that he was a small black boy in a too-big jacket walking through a city park, and that some grown white women, when they saw a boy who looked like him walking toward them on a bench where they were sitting alone, did not see a boy at all. They saw something else. They saw something to be afraid of. He had been on the receiving end of that look enough times to know that approaching a crying stranger on a bench was the kind of thing that could end with police lights and a long, uncomfortable conversation that he was not in the mood to have. He stood on the path with all of these thoughts moving through his head at the same time. And then he thought about his mother. He thought about a particular afternoon when he was 7, when she had taken him with her to the laundromat on Penn Avenue, and there had been a woman sitting in one of the orange plastic chairs at the back with a stroller beside her and a small baby in the stroller, and a face that was not quite crying but was not quite not crying either. His mother had not asked the woman anything. His mother had not made any kind of fuss. His mother had simply walked over with a roll of quarters in her hand and sat down in the orange plastic chair next to the woman and said, very softly, "Whatever it is, baby, you do not have to carry it by yourself in here. Not in front of me." And then she had paid for the woman's laundry without being asked, and she had walked back across the room to Micah and she had said, leaning down so that her face was level with his face, "Listen to me, baby. If you ever see somebody crying where they should not be crying, you remember that crying in public means the inside of their house has run out of room. You hear me? You do not walk past. You do not have to fix it. You just have to not walk past." He had been 7 years old. He had not really understood her then. But the words had stayed in him the way the best things a mother says stay in a child, lodged somewhere just under the ribs, waiting for the moment the body would finally know what to do with them. The moment, it turned out, was now. Micah took a breath. He shifted the paper bag from his right hand to his left, and he took a small, careful step off the path and onto the soft, wet grass that led toward the third bench. He walked slowly, because walking slowly toward a person who was hurting was the only kind of walking that did not make the hurting worse. He stopped a few feet from the end of the bench, far enough away that she would not feel crowded, close enough that she would be able to hear him if he spoke softly, which he intended to. He waited. He had learned that too from his mother, who used to say that you never started a conversation with a person whose mouth was already full of something else. The woman did not look up. She did not seem to have noticed him at all. Her hand was still pressed against her mouth, and her shoulders were still doing that small, terrible shaking, and the wind off the river was lifting a few loose strands of her silver hair and laying them gently against her wet cheek. "Ma'am," Micah said. His voice was so soft that for a second he was not sure he had even said it out loud. He cleared his throat very quietly and tried again. "Ma'am, I am sorry to bother you." The woman went still. It was the kind of stillness that a person settles into when they have suddenly remembered that they are not actually alone, when the small private room they had built around themselves with their own grief has been opened up by another person's voice. Slowly, she lowered her hand from her mouth. Slowly, she lifted her face. Her eyes were the color of weak tea, brown with something gold around the edges, and they were rimmed in pink the way eyes get when a person has been crying for a long time. Her mascara, which had clearly been carefully applied that morning, had run in 2 thin gray lines down her cheekbones and dried there. Her mouth, when she opened it slightly, was the mouth of a woman who was about to say something polite and dismissive, the way grown people did when they wanted a stranger to go away without having to be unkind about it. But she did not say it. She looked at him. She really looked at him. She took in the too big coat, and the sleeves down past his fingertips, and the sneakers that were not white anymore, and the small, careful face with the dark, serious eyes, and something in her own face shifted in a way that even she did not seem to expect. The polite, dismissive thing she had been about to say got caught somewhere in her throat, and what came out instead was nothing. She just looked at him, and the looking lasted longer than was comfortable for either of them, and Micah held his ground because his mother had also taught him that when a grown person looked at you for a long time, it was usually because they were trying to remember something that did not have a name yet. "I am sorry," she said finally. Her voice was lower than he had expected, with the faint hoarseness that crying leaves behind. "I did not see you there. Did you need something, sweetheart?" The word sweetheart landed in his chest in a small, unexpected way. It had been a long time since anyone had called him that. His mother had called him that. Miss Della called him baby, which was close, but sweetheart was its own word, his mother's word, and hearing it from a stranger on a park bench in October made him have to look down at his sneakers for a second before he could trust his face to behave. "No, ma'am," he said. "I did not come over here because I needed something." "Oh," she blinked. She wiped at her cheek with the back of one gloved hand and seemed to realize for the first time that her face was wet. She gave a small, embarrassed laugh that was not really a laugh, the kind of sound a person makes when they are trying to put a polite shape on a thing that does not have a polite shape. "I must look a fright. I am so sorry. I do not usually do this in public. I came here for a walk and I just sat down for a minute and She stopped. She did not seem to know how to finish the sentence. Her hand with the handkerchief in it floated up toward her face and then floated back down again, as if she had forgotten halfway through what she had meant to do with it. "Ma'am," Micah said gently, the way he had heard his mother say it to the woman in the laundromat all those years ago, "you do not have to explain to me. I just came over because I saw you crying and I did not want to walk past." He paused. He shifted the paper bag from his left hand back to his right. "And I brought you this." He held out the bag. She looked at the bag. She looked at his hand holding the bag. She looked back up at his face. Her eyebrows drew together in a small, confused way. "What is it?" she asked. "It is a tuna sandwich, ma'am," he swallowed. "It is the only one I have, and I have not eaten it yet, and it is real good. Miss Della makes them with the pickle relish mixed in, and she puts it on the soft kind of bread, the kind that does not fall apart on you. I was going to eat it on the next bench, but I think you should have it instead." The woman did not move. She did not reach for the bag. She just looked at him, and her mouth opened slightly, and the brown gold eyes that had been crying a moment ago filled up again in a different way, the way eyes fill up when a person has been hit by something they were not braced for. "Sweetheart," she said. Her voice was very careful. "Sweetheart, have you eaten today?" Micah thought about lying. The lie was already half formed in his mouth, the easy lie he had told 100 times before to teachers, and to the woman at the front desk of the public library, and to the lady at the bus stop who had asked him a similar question last winter. The lie was, "Yes, ma'am, I had a big breakfast at home." The lie was always yes. But something about the way she had said "sweetheart," and something about the way she was looking at him not with pity but with the kind of close, honest attention that a person gives another person when they have decided that the answer actually matters, made the lie sit wrong in his mouth. "No, ma'am," he said quietly. "Not today, but I am okay. Miss Della gave me this for lunch, and I was going to eat it in a little while, and I am not as hungry as I look. I am skinny like this on purpose. My mother was skinny, too. We are just made this way." He held the bag out a little farther. "Please, ma'am, I would feel better if you took it. You can have the whole thing. I do not mind." The woman in the camel coat sat very still on the bench. The wind off the river moved through the bare branches above her. Somewhere on the far side of the park, a church bell rang the half-hour, and the sound of it traveled across the wet grass and the empty paths, and seemed to settle around the two of them like a small, invisible roof. She did not take the bag. She did not say anything for a long time. She just looked at the boy standing in front of her in the too-big jacket holding out his only meal, and Micah saw something move across her face that he did not have a word for yet, but that he would understand, years later, was the moment a person realizes that everything they thought they were crying about that morning had just been put into a different size by a child who had no idea what he had just done. She did not take the bag. Instead, very slowly, the way a person moves when they are afraid that a sudden motion might frighten away a small wild creature that has come close enough to almost touch, she patted the empty space on the bench beside her with one gloved hand. "Will you come sit down with me for a minute, sweetheart?" she said. "Just for a minute. You do not have to, but I would be grateful for the company." Micah hesitated. He had been taught, the way most boys in his neighborhood had been taught, that you did not sit down on benches next to strangers, and you especially did not sit down on benches next to grown people you did not know, and you most especially did not sit down on benches next to grown people you did not know in parts of the city where a boy like you was likely to be looked at twice by anyone wearing a uniform. But the woman's face was not the face of a person who was trying to trick him. The woman's face was the face of a person who was holding herself together with very thin string and was asking him, in the only polite way she could think of, not to leave her alone on that bench until the string got stronger. He walked around to the front of the bench. He set the paper bag carefully on the wooden slats between them, the way you set down a thing that does not belong to you, but that you have been entrusted with for a little while. He sat down on the very edge of the bench, his knees together, his hands folded in his lap, the way he had been taught to sit in church when his mother was still alive, and they used to go on the Sundays when she was not working a double shift at the hospital. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind moved across the park in a long, slow exhale. A pigeon landed near the fountain and began to walk in a self-important circle around a piece of bread that someone had left on the rim. The woman beside him pulled her handkerchief out of her left hand, looked at it as if she had forgotten she was holding it, and used it to dab very gently at the dried mascara on her cheeks. "My name," she said finally, "is Alina." "Yes, ma'am," Micah said. "You can call me Alina if you like, or you can call me Mrs. Hale. Whichever feels right to you." "Yes, Mrs. Hale, ma'am." The corner of her mouth lifted very slightly, the way a mouth lifts when a person is too tired for a full smile, but the inside of them is trying anyway. "And what is your name, sweetheart?" "Micah, ma'am, Micah Ellison." "Micah," she said the name slowly, the way a person says a word they have not said in a long time but used to say often. "That is from the Bible, a prophet, I think, a small one." One of the minor prophets, my mother used to call them, as if a person could be a minor prophet, as if a person who spoke for God could ever really be minor. She shook her head slightly, more to herself than to him. "Your name is older than most of the names that get chosen anymore. Did your mother pick it?" Yes, ma'am. She said she liked how it sounded when she said it out loud. That is a good reason to pick a name. Alina folded the handkerchief carefully in her lap. Her gloved hands were trembling just a little, but the tremble was getting smaller now, the way a tremble gets smaller when a body remembers it is not falling. Micah Ellison, I'm very pleased to meet you even on a Tuesday like this one, even on a bench like this one. Yes, ma'am, I am pleased to meet you too. They sat. The pigeon by the fountain found the piece of bread and flew off with it in a small, triumphant flurry of gray feathers. A man in a long blue raincoat walked past on the path, glanced at the two of them with the briefest flicker of curiosity, and then kept walking the way people in cities always kept walking. A few yellow leaves came down out of the trees and settled on the grass and on the bench, and one, a small one, landed directly on top of the paper bag between them as if to mark it. Micah, Alina said, I am not going to eat your sandwich. He started to speak. She held up one gloved hand, gently, the way a teacher might. Let me finish, sweetheart. I am not going to eat your sandwich because that sandwich was given to you by a woman named Miss Della, and she gave it to you because she meant for you to have it, and I have no business taking food out of a child's hand in a park in the middle of the afternoon. That is not the kind of woman I want to be, and it is not the kind of woman my mother raised me to be, so I am not going to eat it. She paused, she looked at him very steadily. But I would like to make you a different offer. There is a small place on the corner just outside the east gate of this park. It is called Vera's. It has been there since I was about your age. They serve breakfast all day, pancakes the size of dinner plates, eggs any way you want them, bacon thick as your thumb. I have not had a proper breakfast yet today either, because I came out here for a walk before I had eaten anything. And now it is almost 2 in the afternoon, and I think I am beginning to understand why I am feeling so far away from myself. I would like to walk over there with you if you would let me, and I would like to buy you any single thing on the menu that you want, and as many of those things as you want, and I would like to sit across from you in a warm booth and eat something myself, because I do not think I should be alone right now, and I do not think you should be hungry. Will you let me do that, sweetheart? Micah looked at the paper bag between them with the yellow leaf on top of it. He looked at the woman's face. He looked at the gloved hand that had stopped trembling now that she had something to do with it. He thought about the offer. He thought about it carefully, the way he had been trained by a year of difficult days to think carefully about every offer a grown person ever made to him. The thing about strangers offering food to children, his mother had told him once, was that you had to look at the shape of the offer, not just the offer itself. You had to look at whether the person was trying to get something from you or trying to give you something back to yourself. You had to look at whether they were leaning toward you or leaning over you. You had to look at whether they used the word please. Mrs. Hale had used the word please. She had said sweetheart in a way that was not a way grown people used to soften you up before they took something. She had asked him to let her do it, instead of telling him she was going to do it. And she had said very plainly that she did not want to be alone, which was the most honest thing a grown person had said to him in a long time. Yes, ma'am, Micah said quietly. I will go with you to Vera's. Alina Hale smiled a small, real smile then, the first one, the kind that came from somewhere deeper than the polite social smiles she had spent most of her adult life producing on cue. She picked up her leather handbag from the bench and tucked the loose handkerchief inside it and zipped it closed. She stood slowly, the way a person stands who has been sitting in one position for too long and has to remind their knees how to bend. She straightened the front of her camel coat. She glanced at her reflection in the small, compact mirror she pulled briefly from the bag, sighed at what she saw, and put the mirror away again. All right, she said. Let me look at least like a woman who has not been crying in a park for an hour. There is no fixing all of it, but I can fix the worst of it. She used the corner of a fresh tissue from her pocket to clean the gray lines off her cheeks, and when she was done, she turned to Micah with a small, wry expression and said, How do I look, Mr. Ellison? Be honest, I can take it. You look fine, ma'am, Micah said. He thought for a second and then added more honestly, You still look like you were crying, but you do not look like you are crying anymore. There is a difference. Alina laughed. It was a short, surprised laugh that seemed to escape her before she had given it permission, and the sound of it cracked the gray afternoon open just slightly, the way the first thaw cracks ice on a pond. Oh, sweetheart, she said. That is the most honest answer anyone has given me in a long time. Come on, bring your sandwich. We are not going to leave it on a bench. Micah picked up the paper bag carefully and folded the top of it down so the sandwich would not slide out and tucked it under his arm. They walked together along the curved path toward the east gate of the park, and Alina walked slowly enough that he did not have to hurry to keep up with her, which he noticed and was grateful for. because most grown people walked at a pace that assumed the person beside them had legs the same length as their own. The east gate of Cooper Park opened out onto a small intersection where four narrow streets met at uneven angles, the way old streets in old neighborhoods sometimes do, because the streets had been there longer than any plan for them. On the far corner, tucked between a shoe repair shop with a faded yellow awning and a small flower stand that was already starting to break down its display for the day, was a low brick building with a hand-painted sign over the door. The sign read simply Vera's. There was a chalkboard set out on the sidewalk with the day's specials written in careful blue chalk. There was steam fogging the inside of the front window in a way that made the warm yellow light inside look softer and farther away than it really was. Eleanor pushed open the door. A small bell above it gave a friendly two-note chime. The smell that came out to meet them was the smell of bacon and coffee and butter melting on a griddle, the smell of a place where people had been fed properly for a long time, the kind of smell that makes a person who has been cold for hours feel, very suddenly, like crying again. Micah did not cry. He had decided somewhere between the bench and the door that he was not going to cry in front of Mrs. Hale today, because she had cried enough for both of them already, and his job was clearly to be the one who held the steady end of the rope. But the smell got into his chest and sat there, and he had to stop just inside the door for a second and breathe. The woman behind the counter was in her 50s, with a thick black braid going gray at the temples and a green apron tied around her waist. She looked up when the bell rang, and her face did a small, interesting thing. First it registered Eleanor, and her eyebrows went up in surprise. Then it registered Micah at Eleanor's side, and her eyebrows went down again, settled, became neutral and warm in the same motion, the way the face of a person who has run a diner for 30 years settles when they have decided not to ask any questions out loud. "Eleanor," the woman said, "it has been a while. Booth, please, Vera, the one in the back if it is free. It is always free for you, go on." Eleanor put a hand lightly on Micah's shoulder, just lightly enough that he could have shrugged it off if he had wanted to, and steered him gently toward a booth in the back corner of the diner. The booth had high wooden sides that came up almost to Micah's shoulder when he sat down, and the table between them was solid and warm and covered with a red and white checkered oilcloth that had been wiped clean 1,000 times. There was a small jar of sugar packets, a bottle of ketchup, a salt and pepper shaker shaped like two little chickens, and a stack of paper napkins in a chrome holder. Micah set the paper bag with the sandwich very carefully on the seat beside him. Vera came over with 2 mugs and a heavy glass pot of coffee. She did not ask. She just poured coffee into Eleanor's mug, and then she looked at Micah and said, "And for you, young man. We have milk, we have orange juice, we have hot chocolate. Hot chocolate has the little marshmallows in it. I'm told by reliable sources that this is important." "Hot chocolate, please, ma'am," Micah said, "with the marshmallows. A man who knows his mind, I like that." Vera left the coffee pot on the table and disappeared back behind the counter without writing anything down. Eleanor wrapped both hands around her mug and held it there, not drinking yet, just letting the warmth move into her palms. She looked across the table at Micah for a long, quiet second, and Micah, who had spent the entire walk over wondering what they were going to talk about once they sat down, suddenly understood that they were not going to have to talk about anything they did not want to talk about. He could feel that in the way she was sitting, there was no pressure in it. There was no demand. There was just a woman and a boy and a checkered tablecloth and the smell of bacon, and whatever else came was going to come at its own pace. "Micah," Eleanor said, "before we order, I want to tell you something. I want to tell you why I was on that bench. You do not have to tell me anything in return. You do not have to tell me one single thing about yourself if you do not want to. But it does not feel right to me to sit across from a person who showed me as much kindness as you just did and not tell them the truth about why their kindness mattered. So I am going to tell you. Is that all right?" "Yes, ma'am," Micah said quietly. Eleanor took a slow breath. She set the coffee mug down. She folded her gloved hands on the checkered cloth between them. "This morning," she said, "I buried my husband." Micah did not move. He did not say anything. He had learned sometime in the long year after his mother died that when a grown person told you a sentence like that one, the worst thing you could do was rush to fill the silence that came after it. The silence was part of the sentence. The silence was where the sentence sat down to rest. Eleanor held the silence for a moment. Then she went on, her voice very even, very careful. "His name was Theodore. He was 71 years old. We were married for 46 years. He was sick for the last 2 of them, and we knew this morning was coming for almost a year, which is a thing that people will tell you is a blessing because it gives you time to prepare. I am here to tell you, Micah Ellison, on behalf of a woman who just sat through a funeral she has been preparing for, that there is no such thing as preparing. Not for the real thing. Not for the part where you walk out of the cemetery and into the rest of your life. Micah looked down at the checkered cloth. He looked at the little ketchup bottle and at the salt and pepper shakers shaped like chickens and at the steam coming off the top of Aliner's coffee. He looked at all of those small, ordinary things on the table because he had learned that when a grown person said something that big, you sometimes had to give your eyes something small to hold on to. "I am sorry, ma'am," he said. "I am real sorry about your husband. Thank you, sweetheart. My mother died too." He said it before he had decided to say it, before he had thought about whether or not he was going to. The words came out the way water comes out of a glass you have tipped too far, all at once and without asking. "A year ago, a year and 3 months, she was in a car. It was not her fault. The other car came across the middle of the road, and the man driving it had been drinking, and she was on her way home from work. She worked at the hospital. She was a nurse. She did the long shifts because she said the long shifts paid better and we needed the money for the apartment." He stopped. He took a small breath. Her name was Renee. Aliner did not say, "I am sorry." She did not say any of the smaller things that grown people sometimes said when they did not know what to do with a sentence like that one. She just looked at him across the table for a long moment, and her brown gold eyes filled up again very quietly, but she did not let any of it fall. She nodded once the way a person nods when they have heard something important and are making room for it. "Renee," she said. The way she said it was the way Harold Whittaker in another city in another year had said the name Renee's son was carrying, as if the name were a small heavy stone she was holding carefully in her palm. "That is a good name, a strong name. I am very sorry, Micah. I am very sorry that you have been carrying that for a year and 3 months. "Yes, ma'am. And who has been taking care of you, sweetheart, since?" He thought about lying again. He thought about the easy version, the polite version, the version where he told her that he lived with his aunt and that everything was fine and that he had just come to the park for a walk because the weather had been nice that morning. It was the version he had been telling adults for a year, and it was the version that usually made adults nod and smile and move on to the next subject because they did not really want to hear the other version. The other version made them uncomfortable. But Aliner Hale had just told him about a husband she had buried that morning, and she had done it without flinching, and the way she had told him made him feel, for the first time in a long time, that there might be a grown person sitting in front of him who actually wanted the real answer. "My Aunt Yvonne," he said. "She tried real hard, ma'am. For a long time she tried. But then she lost her job in March because the place where she worked closed down, and then she could not pay the rent, and the man who owned the building said we had to be out by the end of August. And so now she is staying with her cousin in McKeesport, but her cousin's apartment is real small and there is no room for me, and so I have been—" He stopped. He had not meant to say all of that. The words had gotten ahead of him. "I have been staying some nights at the back of Miss Della's kitchen. She has a room back there. She lets me sleep on a cot. And some nights I stay other places. I am working it out, ma'am. It is just for now. My aunt is going to come back and get me as soon as she can." Aliner's hands on the checkered cloth had gone very still. She did not say anything for a moment. When she did speak, her voice was even softer than it had been before. "Sweetheart," she said, "how old are you?" 11, ma'am. 11. She closed her eyes briefly. She opened them again. "And nobody at school has noticed?" "I am not in school right now, ma'am. The school is in a different part of the city from where I was staying with my aunt, and I do not have a way to get over there every morning anymore. Miss Della says I can start at the school by her kitchen in January if I am still around then. She is working on it. She knows somebody at the office." Vera arrived at the booth at exactly that moment, the way good waitresses always seem to arrive at exactly the right moment, with a steaming mug of hot chocolate piled high with small white marshmallows. She set it down in front of Micah. She did not look at Aliner. She did not look at the careful stillness that had settled over the table. She just set the mug down and produced a small notepad from her apron pocket and said, in the same warm, neutral voice she had used at the door, "All right. Tell me what is going to make you both feel like human beings again." Aliner cleared her throat very quietly. "Micah," she said, "you tell Vera what you would like. Anything on the menu, take your time." Micah looked at the menu that Vera had set down between them. He had not been allowed to look at a menu like this in a long time, the kind of menu that had every breakfast a person could think of, and several kinds he had never thought of at all. He read it carefully. He felt the way he had felt in the public library the first time he had walked into the children's section, and understood that he was allowed to take any book home that he wanted. He felt almost embarrassed by the size of the permission. "I would like the pancakes, please, ma'am," he said. "The full stack, and the eggs scrambled, and bacon, and if it is not too much, the hash browns." "That is a good order," Vera said, writing it down. "That is exactly the order I would have made for you if you had asked me. Mrs. Hale?" "The same, Vera, exactly the same." "You got it." Vera tore the page off her notepad and was gone again before either of them could say thank you. Alina turned back to Micah. She picked up her coffee and took a slow sip and set it down. Her eyes had not left his face. "Miss Della," she said. "Tell me about Miss Della." So he did. He told her about Miss Della and the small community kitchen on the corner of Leamington and Frankstown, and about the cot in the back room and the way Miss Della always made him wash his hands before he sat down to eat even when there was nobody else to see him do it, and about Miss Della's husband who had died years ago and who had built the long wooden table in the kitchen by hand. He told her about the other people who came to eat at the kitchen, the old men who played dominoes at the end of the table after the meal was over, the young mothers who came in with their bobbies, the man named Curtis who had been a teacher once and who sometimes helped Micah with his math homework when there was math homework to be helped with. He told her about Miss Della's rule that nobody who ate at her table was allowed to leave without being told one true thing they were good at, because Miss Della said that hungry children grew up not knowing what they were good at, and that knowing what you were good at was a thing you had to be told out loud by somebody who meant it. Alina listened to all of it without interrupting. She did not take notes. She did not pull out a phone. She did not do any of the things that grown people sometimes did when they were collecting information about a problem they intended to solve. She just listened, the way his mother used to listen, the way you listen to a person when you have already decided that the person is more important than whatever you were going to say next. When the food came, Micah ate. He ate slowly at first, because his stomach had been quiet for so long that it needed time to remember what to do, and then more steadily as the warmth of the food worked its way through him. Alina ate too, in small, careful bites, and at one point she reached across the table and tucked the paper bag with the tuna sandwich into the side of her own handbag, and she said very gently, "We are going to take this with us. You are not leaving anything Miss Della made for you behind in a booth. We are going to take it home, and you are going to have it for breakfast tomorrow." Micah did not point out that he did not really have a home to take it to. He nodded. He ate another bite of pancake. He thought that breakfast tomorrow sounded like a thing that belonged to other children, and he tried not to let himself believe in it too hard. They sat in the booth for a long time after the plates were empty. Vera came by twice with the coffee pot and refilled Alina's cup without asking, and the second time she set down a small plate with 2 cinnamon rolls on it and said only, "On the house. Do not argue with me, Alina," before walking away again. Alina pushed the plate toward Micah's side of the table. Micah did not argue either. He ate one of the cinnamon rolls slowly, one careful curl at a time, and Alina ate the other while she watched the light through the front window deepen from the gray of early afternoon into the warmer gray of late afternoon, the kind of gray that meant the day was beginning to look around for somewhere to put itself down for the night. "Micah," she said eventually, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to know before I ask it that you are allowed to say no. That is the most important part of this. You can say no, and I will not be hurt, and I will not press you, and I will not pretend that your no is anything other than the answer you wanted to give. Do you understand that?" "Yes, ma'am." "All right." She folded her hands again on the checkered cloth. "I am going to be honest with you, sweetheart. I do not want you to sleep on a cot in the back of a kitchen tonight. I do not think any child should sleep on a cot in the back of a kitchen on a cold night in October, and I especially do not think that a child who just gave a stranger on a park bench the only food he owned should be sleeping on a cot in the back of a kitchen tonight. I have a house. It is on the other side of the river. It has more rooms than I know what to do with, and there is one in particular, a small one on the ground floor with a window that looks out into a garden that I think you would like very much. The bed in it is made up with clean sheets. There is a bathroom of its own attached to it, with a door that locks from the inside. There is a woman named Constance who has worked for me for 28 years and who runs the kitchen, and she is the kind of woman who, the moment she lays eyes on you, is going to start asking me why I did not bring you home sooner." She paused. She looked at him very steadily. "I would like to offer you that room, Micah, for tonight to start. Tomorrow we can figure out what comes next. I would also like, with your permission, to telephone Miss Della from the diner here before we leave, so that she knows where you are and so that she does not worry about you. Because a woman who has been feeding you and giving you a cot in the back of her kitchen is a woman who deserves to be told the truth about where you are sleeping tonight." And then, in the morning, with your permission, I would like to find your Aunt Yvonne, and I would like to sit down with her and with you and with anyone else who needs to be at the table, and I would like all of us together to figure out what the right shape of the next part of your life is going to look like. I am not trying to take you anywhere you do not want to go. I am not trying to be your mother. Nobody is going to be your mother. Your mother was your mother, and that is not a job a stranger gets to apply for. I am only trying to make sure that you are warm tonight and that you are fed tomorrow and that the people who care about you know where you are. That is all I am offering. That is the whole offer." She stopped. She took a small breath that she did not seem to want him to notice. "You may say no, Micah Ellison. And whatever you say when we walk out of this diner, I am going to leave you with my telephone number written on a piece of paper. And I am going to mean it when I say that you can call me. And Vera is going to know how to reach me, too, and so you will never have to go looking very hard for me if you change your mind later. But I would like very much, if it is all the same to you, for you to say yes." Micah looked down at the empty plate in front of him. He looked at the small smear of syrup at the edge of it, and at the crumb of cinnamon roll on the checkered cloth, and at his own hands in his lap. His hands were not red and cold anymore. They had been warmed by the mug of hot chocolate and by the diner and by the long, slow meal, and they looked to him almost like the hands of a different boy than the one who had walked into Cooper Park 3 hours ago. He thought about the cot in the back of Miss Della's kitchen. He thought about the way the radiator in that room made a knocking sound at irregular intervals throughout the night that he had learned to sleep through. He thought about Miss Della herself, and about how Miss Della would react if he came in tomorrow morning and told her that he had spent the night at a strange woman's house across the river. He thought Miss Della would have many questions. He thought Miss Della would probably want to meet this woman herself before she would feel right about any of it. He looked up. "Yes, ma'am," he said carefully. "I would like that very much, but Miss Della is going to want to talk to you on the telephone before I go anywhere. She's going to want to hear your voice, and she is going to want to ask you some questions, and she is not going to let me go with you unless she is satisfied with the answers. That is the way Miss Della is. And I do not want to lie to her or sneak around on her. She has been real good to me. So if you call her, you have to talk to her for as long as she wants to talk, and you have to answer everything she asks you, and you cannot get short with her even if her questions take a long time. Is that all right?" Eleanor Hale smiled. It was a different kind of smile this time, a kind of smile that started in her eyes and worked its way down into the rest of her face. The smile of a woman who had been told off, very politely, by an 11-year-old, and who was delighted to have been told off because the telling off was such a clear sign that the child sitting across from her had at least one good adult in his corner. "Sweetheart," she said, "that is exactly the right answer. I would not have it any other way. Vera, may I borrow your phone?" Vera, who had clearly been listening to every word of the conversation from her station behind the counter, without making any sign that she was, walked over to the booth with the old beige cordless telephone from beside the register, and set it down on the table without comment. Micah recited the number for Miss Della's kitchen carefully, the way he had been taught to recite it in case anything ever went wrong, and Eleanor dialed it, and when the line connected, she introduced herself in a calm, steady voice and said, "Ma'am, my name is Eleanor Hale, and I am sitting in a booth at Vera's diner across from the corner of Cooper Park with a young man named Micah Ellison, who has just done me a kindness this afternoon that I am going to spend a long time trying to thank him properly for, and I would like to talk to you for as long as you need before I take him anywhere." What followed was a phone call that lasted almost 20 minutes. Eleanor sat with the phone pressed against her ear and answered every question that came down the line in her even careful voice. And at one point she handed the phone to Micah so he could speak to Miss Della himself, and Micah told Miss Della that yes, he was all right, and yes, the woman was kind, and yes, he wanted to go, and yes, he understood that he was going to call Miss Della in the morning before 9, and yes, ma'am. He was going to remember to say his prayers and brush his teeth even at a strange person's house, because the strange person's house was no excuse to forget the basics. Then he handed the phone back to Eleanor, and Eleanor listened for another long moment, and then she said very gently, "Miss Della, I want you to know that I hear you, and I want you to know that the boy is safe with me. And I want you to know that if at any point tonight or tomorrow you change your mind, all you have to do is call this number back, and I will have him at your kitchen door in less than an hour." She hung up the phone. She looked across the table at Micah. "Miss Della," she said, "is going to be a good friend of mine. I can tell already. Are you ready, sweetheart?" Eleanor settled the bill with Vera in a way that Micah did not quite see, the way Eleanor had quietly settled a great many bills over the course of her life without making anyone at the table feel like a charity case. She helped Micah into his too big coat. She picked up her handbag, with the tuna sandwich tucked safely inside it, and she paused at the counter on her way out to lean across and say something quietly to Vera that Micah could not hear. Vera nodded once. Vera reached out and squeezed Eleanor's hand. Eleanor squeezed back. Then they walked out of the diner together, and the small bell above the door gave its two-note chime behind them, and the cold late afternoon air outside felt sharper than Micah remembered, the way air feels sharp when you have been warm for a long time and your skin has forgotten what it is supposed to brace for. Eleanor took her phone from her handbag. It was a small, dark phone in a worn leather case that had clearly been used for years. She tapped it twice with one gloved thumb. She lifted it to her ear. "Hello, Walter," she said. "Yes, I'm at Vera's. Could you come around? Thank you, dear." She slipped the phone back into her bag. She turned to Micah. "My friend Walter is going to come pick us up," she said. "He helps me with the driving. He is older than I am, which is saying something. He has been driving me for almost as long as I have known how to drive myself, which never made any particular sense to either of us, but it has worked out. He will be here in about 3 minutes. Are you cold? Do you want to wait inside?" "I am all right, ma'am," Micah said. He was actually. The food sat warm in him in a way he had not felt in a long time, and the cold could not quite get through it. They stood on the sidewalk outside Vera's. The flower stand on the corner had finished breaking down for the day. The man who ran it was rolling up a green canvas awning, and he glanced over at the two of them, did a small double take, and then very politely looked away, the way the man at the corner liquor store had once looked very politely at Harold Whittaker and a small boy carrying a torn grocery bag in a city 300 miles away. A long, dark car came around the corner. It was not flashy. It was not the kind of car that announced itself. It was the kind of car that simply was, low and quiet and serious, with a soft hum to it that Micah could hear before he could see it clearly. It pulled up in front of the diner and stopped. A tall, thin man in his late 70s, with white hair clipped close to his head and a long charcoal overcoat, climbed slowly out of the driver's seat and walked around to the rear passenger door. His face, when he came into the light from the diner window, was the face of a man who had spent a great deal of his life waiting for the same woman to be ready to go home, and who had decided long ago that the waiting was not a chore but a privilege. "Mrs. Hale," he said. "Good afternoon. Walter, this is Micah Ellison. Micah, this is Walter Briggs. He has been my friend for 41 years. Mr. Ellison," Walter said, and he tipped his head with such complete seriousness that Micah felt his back straighten almost without him meaning it to. "I am pleased to meet you." "Yes, sir," Micah said. "Pleased to meet you too." Walter opened the rear door of the car. The warm air from inside rolled out onto the sidewalk, carrying with it the soft smell of leather and a faint trace of pipe tobacco that Micah could not place, but that reminded him, in a way he could not explain, of being 5 years old and falling asleep in his grandfather's lap before his grandfather had died. He hesitated at the door the way a person hesitates at the edge of a thing that does not belong to their life. Eleanor put her hand lightly on his shoulder again. "Go on, sweetheart. There is plenty of room. You are not going to break it." He climbed in. The seat was wider than the couch in his Aunt Yvonne's old living room. The leather was warm in a way that made him understand for the first time that the car had been waiting somewhere with the heater running, just for them. He sat very still with his backpack on his lap and his hands folded on top of his backpack, and Eleanor settled in beside him with a slow, careful sigh of a woman who had been on her feet too long, and Walter closed the door with a soft, expensive sound and walked around and slid behind the wheel. "Home, Mrs. Hale?" "Home, Walter, please, and take the long way. I want Micah to see the river." The car pulled away from the curb so quietly that Micah was not sure for the first half block that they were actually moving. He pressed his face very lightly against the window. Eleanor did not stop him. She did not warn him about leaving smudges on the glass, the way some grown people did. She just let him look. They drove along Cooper Park on the side opposite to where Micah had been walking that morning, and then they crossed a wide street and started down a long sloping road that wound between old brick buildings toward the river. The Allegheny was already dark in the late afternoon, the color of slate, with the lights from the buildings on the far bank breaking up its surface in long, wavering yellow lines. They crossed it on a bridge that Micah had walked across once with his mother on a Saturday afternoon 2 summers ago, and he watched the water move beneath them, and he did not say anything about the memory because the memory was his and was not for sharing yet. But Eleanor seemed to understand something about the quality of his silence, and she did not break it. On the far side of the river, the road climbed gradually away from the city. The buildings got smaller and farther apart. The trees got taller. After about 15 minutes, they turned onto a narrow road that ran between two long stone walls, and that ended at a pair of black iron gates. The gates opened, slowly and quietly, as the car approached. Micah watched the gates as they swung wide. He did not say anything. He had seen gates like these only in movies and in the long establishing shots that came before the part of the story where something bad was usually about to happen. The driveway behind the gates was made of pale gravel and lined with old oak trees. It curved gently for what Micah estimated to be at least a quarter of a mile before the house came into view, and when it did, Micah felt his breath stop for a second the way a person's breath stops when they have suddenly understood that they have been wrong about something all afternoon. The house was not a mansion in the way Micah had always pictured mansions. It was not white and tall with columns. It was long and low and made of the same pale gray stone as the walls along the road, with a slate roof and tall narrow windows already lit warm and yellow against the gathering dusk. There was a low garden in front of it, asleep for the winter, with the dark shapes of dormant rose bushes and a stone fountain that had been covered with a tarp. There was a small cottage off to one side, with smoke coming gently from its chimney. There was a black iron lamp burning beside the front door. It was the kind of house that a person did not build. It was the kind of house that a person inherited from a grandfather who had inherited it from his father. The kind of house that had been there long enough to belong to the land instead of to anyone living. Micah stared at it through the window of the car, and the small, careful animal of hope he had been protecting in his chest all afternoon shifted very slightly, the way a small, careful animal shifts when it realizes that the place it has been brought to is bigger than any place it has ever imagined being allowed inside. "It is just a house, sweetheart," Billionaire said gently beside him, watching his face. "It is bigger than it needs to be. It has always been bigger than it needs to be. Theodore and I never had children, so most of the rooms are empty most of the time. I like the kitchen and the library and the small parlor with the fireplace. The rest of it I mostly just walk through on my way to one of those 3 rooms. Do not be afraid of it. It will not hurt you. It is just stone." Walter brought the car around in a slow, gentle arc and stopped at the foot of the wide stone steps that led up to the front door. The door opened before he had fully shut off the engine, and a small, round woman in a long gray cardigan came out onto the top step with her hands already on her hips, and a face that was doing its very best to look stern and was failing completely. "Billionaire Hale," she said before Billionaire had even climbed out of the car, "I have been calling you for 3 hours, 3 hours, after the morning you have had. I was about to send Walter out a second time to look for you, and now you come up the drive with a young man I have never seen before, and you have not even called from the road to tell me to set another place at the table. You are going to put me in an early grave, woman, and I am older than you, so that is saying something." Billionaire laughed. It was the second real laugh of the afternoon. "Constance," she said, "I have brought home a guest. His name is Micah Ellison. He is 11 years old and he has had a very long day, and so have I. And I am going to need you to be the version of yourself that frightens me a little less and feeds people a little more." Constance's stern face cracked open at the sight of Micah climbing carefully out of the back of the car. It cracked the way a piece of bread cracks when you tear it. She came down the stone steps with her hands still on her hips, and she stopped 2 steps above him so that she could look down into his face without having to bend, and she said in a voice that was suddenly the kindest voice Micah had heard in a long time, "Young man, you are very welcome here. My name is Constance Wheeler. I run the kitchen and I run Mrs. Hale, although she does not always know it. Are you hungry?" "No, ma'am," Micah said honestly. "Mrs. Hale fed me at Vera's. I do not think I could eat another bite right now if I tried." "That is the right answer for now, the wrong answer in 2 hours. We are going to revisit the question." She turned. "Come inside, both of you. The wind is starting to find places I do not appreciate." Micah followed Billionaire up the wide stone steps with his backpack clutched in front of him. Walter took the car around the side of the house toward a small outbuilding that Micah guessed was a garage. The front door of the house was heavy and made of dark wood, with an iron handle worn smooth by what looked like 100 years of palms. Constance held it open for them. Inside, the front hall was wide and warm and smelled faintly of beeswax and old books. There was a long Persian runner down the middle of the stone floor. There was a tall mirror in a dark wooden frame on one wall. There was a coat tree by the door with 2 coats already hanging on it, one of which Micah suspected, with a small private pang, had probably belonged to Theodore Hale until that morning. Constance helped Micah out of his coat as if he were any other guest, with no fuss made over the size of it or the worn places at the cuffs. She hung it on the coat tree beside Billionaire's camel coat. She said, "Mrs. Hale, the fire is going in the small parlor. I will bring something warm to drink." Micah, sweetheart, would you like tea or would you like a glass of milk? Milk, please, ma'am. Milk it is. Mrs. Hale, you will have tea because you always have tea, and tonight you are going to drink the whole cup of it. Eleanor smiled tiredly. Yes, Constance. Constance disappeared down a hallway toward what Micah assumed was the kitchen. Eleanor led him through a wide archway into a room that was smaller than the front hall, but still felt to him like the largest room he had ever been inside, that did not have rows of bookshelves and a hush about it. There was a fireplace on one wall, with a real fire burning low and steady behind a brass screen. There were 2 deep armchairs and a small velvet sofa arranged around the hearth. There was a low table between them with a chess set in mid-game laid out across the top of it, the pieces still in the positions they had been left in by someone who, Micah understood quietly, was not going to come back to finish the match. There were photographs on the mantelpiece. Micah did not mean to look at them exactly, but the eye goes where the eye goes, and his went there. He saw a black and white photograph of a much younger Eleanor in a wedding dress, standing beside a tall, serious-looking young man in a dark suit. He saw a color photograph of the same 2 of them, older, standing in front of a building made entirely of glass, with a sign on it that Micah could not quite read from where he was. He saw another photograph of Eleanor shaking hands with a man whose face Micah was almost sure he had seen on the news once, although he could not remember why. He saw a small framed magazine cover propped at the back with Eleanor's face on the front of it and a headline he could not read from this distance. He sat down on the edge of the velvet sofa. Eleanor settled into the armchair nearest the fire with a soft sigh. The fire moved gently in its grate. Somewhere in the house a clock ticked. "Mrs. Hale," Micah said after a moment, "can I ask you something? You said I could ask you anything." "I did." "And you can? What is on that magazine cover with your face on it?" Eleanor turned her head and looked at the mantel. She looked at the small framed cover for a long moment as if she had forgotten it was there. Then she turned back to him. "That," she said, "is an old picture. It is from a long time ago. There was a magazine that used to write about businesses, and Theodore and I had built a company together that they wanted to write about, and they put my picture on the front of it. I did not particularly want to be on the front of it, but Theodore said it was good for the company, and Theodore was almost always right about things like that, so I sat for the photograph and I tried not to look too unhappy about it." "What kind of company?" "We made things for hospitals, sweetheart, equipment. The kind of equipment that helps doctors do their work and that helps nurses do theirs. Theodore was an engineer when I met him. He had ideas for machines that nobody else had. I was good at the part where you take an idea and you turn it into a business. We were good together. We started small in a workshop on the south side of the city with 3 people working for us. By the time Theodore got sick, the company had about 9,000 people working for it in various places around the country." Micah was very still. "How many?" he said. 9,000, give or take. It changes. It might be a little less than that now. I have not looked at the numbers in a few weeks. I have been busy with other things." She said it the way a person says any ordinary thing, the way a person says that the weather has been a little colder this week than last week. There was no pride in it. There was no display. There was just the fact of it, laid on the table between them like the chess set on the low table, like a thing that had simply existed for a long time, and that did not need to be made larger by the telling. Micah thought about that number, 9,000 people. He tried to picture 9,000 people in a single room. He could not. He thought about Miss Della's kitchen, which had room for maybe 20 people at the long wooden table, and about how full and noisy the kitchen felt when it was full, and he tried to imagine 9,000 of that, and his mind would not hold the shape. "Mrs. Hale," he said carefully, "are you rich?" Eleanor looked at him across the fire. The corner of her mouth lifted very slightly, in the same tired, wry way it had lifted at Vera's when he had told her she still looked like she had been crying. "Yes, sweetheart," she said. "I am very rich. I am the kind of rich that the people who write articles about money sometimes use a longer word for. There is a word for it that begins with the letter B. I do not particularly like the word. I do not think of myself by it. But it is the truthful answer to your question, and you asked the question fairly, so I am giving you the truthful answer." Micah looked down at his hands in his lap. He looked at his fingers, which had been red and cold 3 hours ago and were warm now. He looked at the worn knees of his jeans. He looked at the sofa beneath him, which was the softest thing he had ever sat on. He looked at the chess set, with its small carved pieces standing exactly where Theodore Hale had left them, and at the fire in the grate, and at the photographs on the mantel. He thought about the paper bag with the tuna sandwich in it, the one Eleanor had tucked into her handbag at the diner, the one she had promised would be his breakfast in the morning. He thought about a woman in a long camel coat crying on a bench in Cooper Park that afternoon, alone, with mascara running down her face. And he thought about how he had walked toward her without knowing any of this, without knowing anything at all about her except that she was hurting where she should not be hurting, and how if he had known all of it ahead of time, he would probably have been too afraid of all of it to walk over there at all. He was glad he had not known. He understood in a way that even at 11 years old he had words for that not knowing had been the whole point, that the only reason he had been able to do the thing he had done was that he had thought she was just a woman. "Mrs. Hale," he said, "I am glad I did not know that before." "I know, sweetheart," Eleanor said. "So am I." Constance came back into the room then with a tray. She set down a mug of tea in front of Eleanor and a tall glass of cold milk in front of Micah and a small plate of plain butter cookies between them. She looked at Eleanor, and Eleanor looked at her, and something passed between them that did not need any words, the kind of look that two women who have worked together for 28 years can give each other across a room. Then Constance turned to Micah and she said, "Young man, when you are ready, I am going to show you to the green room. The sheets are clean. The towels in the bathroom are clean. There is a robe on the back of the door that is going to be slightly too large for you, but it is warm, and that is what matters. There is a small lamp on the table beside the bed that has a switch on the cord. There is a glass of water already on the nightstand. There's a clock that I have set to 7 in the morning so that you can call Miss Della before 9 the way you promised her. If you need anything in the night, anything at all, my room is at the top of the back stairs and the door is never locked. You knock, you walk in, you wake me up. That is the rule of this house. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am," Micah said. "Thank you, ma'am." "Good, drink your milk." He drank his milk. The fire moved gently in the grate. Outside, the wind that had pushed at him all day in Cooper Park moved through the bare trees of Eleanor Hale's garden and could not get inside. He slept that night in the green room with the door locked from the inside, the way Eleanor had promised it could be. And the strange thing was that after the first half hour of lying awake and listening to all the unfamiliar sounds of a large old house, he did not actually need the lock at all. He slept the way a child sleeps when the body has finally accepted that nothing is going to come through the door, that the wind cannot find him here, that the long, careful animal of hope that he had been protecting all day had finally been allowed to put its head down on the bed beside him. In the morning, he called Miss Della from the telephone on the nightstand at 7 o'clock exactly, and Miss Della spoke to him for a long time, and then spoke to Eleanor for a long time, and then spoke to Constance for a long time. And by the time the three women had finished their conversations, a great many things had quietly been decided between them that Micah was not yet aware of. He ate his tuna sandwich for breakfast at the kitchen table, as Eleanor had promised he would, and Constance set down a tall glass of orange juice beside it, and did not comment on the choice of meal in any way, because Constance understood that a sandwich a person has carried for a whole day is a sandwich that has earned its place at the table. Aunt Yvonne came up the gravel drive that afternoon in the back of Walter's long, dark car, and she sat at the long table in Eleanor's dining room with her purse on her lap and her eyes wide. And Eleanor talked to her in the same even careful voice she had used on the bench in the park. And at the end of the conversation, Aunt Yvonne was crying quietly into a handkerchief that Eleanor had handed her without ceremony. And a number of things that had been impossible the day before were suddenly, quietly, no longer impossible. There was an apartment that came open the following month, a small, clean two-bedroom on a quiet street in a part of the city that was easier for Yvonne to get to her new job from. And the rent on it was somehow always paid on time, even on the months that Yvonne could not quite make the numbers add up. And neither Yvonne nor Micah was ever told in plain words who was making up the difference, because Eleanor had a particular skill. The same skill Harold Whittaker had used 3 decades earlier in another city, for handling money in a way that did not make a person feel like a charity case. Micah went back to school in January. He was placed in the school that Miss Della had been working on, and he did well there, and he did better the following year, and better still the year after that. Eleanor came to his 6th grade promotion ceremony in a navy blue dress and sat in the 3rd row beside Aunt Yvonne and Miss Della. And the 3 women clapped together when his name was called. And Micah, walking across the small stage in a borrowed tie, saw the 3 of them sitting there in a row and understood, in a way that even at 12 he had words for, that his mother had been right about the world. The world got better only when people decided to keep being the better part of it first. Eleanor did not adopt him. There was never any question of that. Eleanor was not his mother and Aunt Yvonne was his family, and Alina understood from the very first afternoon, the way she had said so plainly across the checkered tablecloth at Vera's, that nobody was applying for the job that Renee Ellison had once held. But Alina became something the English language does not quite have a single word for. She became a fixed thing in his life, the way a lighthouse is a fixed thing on a coast. She was there on Sunday afternoons when Walter came around in the long, dark car to bring him out to the house for dinner. She was there at his high school graduation in a different navy blue dress, with Miss Della on one side of her and Aunt Yvonne on the other. She was there at his college graduation 4 years later, on the lawn of a university that had given him a scholarship she had quietly arranged without ever telling him she had arranged it. The same way Harold Whittaker had once arranged a scholarship for a boy named Elijah Monroe in a city 300 miles to the west. Although neither Micah nor Alina had ever heard either of those names, and would not have known the symmetry if anyone had told them. The story of how they met did not become a viral video. There were no cameras in Cooper Park that October afternoon. Vera at the diner kept her counsel for the rest of her working life, and Walter and Constance and Miss Della were all the kind of people who knew how to keep a thing that was not theirs to tell. The story stayed where it began between the two of them, the way the most important stories almost always do. Alina Hale died at the age of 79, in the small parlor with the fireplace, in the same armchair she had been sitting in the night Micah first saw the chess set on the low table. Constance was holding her hand. Micah, who was 22 years old by then and in his last year of college, was sitting on the velvet sofa across from her, reading aloud from a book she had given him for his 16th birthday and that she had asked him to read to her one more time. She had not been afraid, she had been ready. She had said earlier that evening that she had been ready for a long time and that the only reason she had stayed as long as she had was that she had wanted to see how a few things turned out, and she had seen them turn out, and so it was all right now. In her will there was a letter for Micah. It was short. It said, "Sweetheart, I want you to remember 3 things. The first is that your mother chose your name, and the name is older than most of the names that get chosen anymore. The second is that you walked across the grass toward a stranger on a bench when you did not have to, and you carried only one meal in the whole world and you offered it to her anyway, and you did this when you did not know who she was, which is the only way it could ever have counted. The third is that the world only stays kind if somebody, somewhere, decides to keep being kind first. And you, Micah Ellison, decided to be kind first on a Tuesday in October when you were 11 years old, and you have been deciding it every day since, and you saved a great deal more than you will ever know." She left him the small stone house on the far side of the river and the long oak-lined drive and Constance's cottage, with Constance in it for as long as Constance wanted to be there. She left the bulk of her fortune, the larger number that the magazines used the word beginning with B for, in a foundation. The foundation was already named, because Alina had been thinking about it for years and had wanted the name to be the right one. She called it the Cooper Bench Foundation. Its work was simple. It found children who were sleeping where children should not be sleeping, and it gave them a room with a door that locked from the inside and a bed with clean sheets and a hot meal that nobody asked them to be grateful for. And it found the women in their neighborhoods who had been quietly feeding them on cots in the backs of kitchens for years. And it gave those women the resources to do that work properly and in the daylight. Micah runs the foundation now. He is 41 years old. He still keeps a paper bag in the bottom drawer of his desk, folded carefully flat, which he has had for 30 years, and which once held a tuna sandwich on the soft kind of bread, the kind that does not fall apart on you. Sometimes, on the hard days, when a case is not going the way he wants it to go, or when the paperwork has piled up, or when a child arrives at the front door of one of the foundation's houses with eyes that remind him too much of his own at 11, he takes the bag out and he sets it on his desk and he looks at it for a few minutes. Then he puts it away and he gets back to work. He has never told anyone what is in the drawer, and he has never opened the bag to check whether it is empty, and he never will, because the bag is not really empty and never has been, and he understands now, the way Alina Hale understood at the end, and the way Renee Ellison understood from the beginning, that the smallest possible thing a person owns is sometimes the largest possible thing they can give. If this story moved something in you, leave a comment telling me what part stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight, and subscribe for more stories of quiet kindness and the unexpected places it lands. Thank you for being here.